Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is the virtual edition of the next community conversation. Uh, Thanks for joining in, just making sure everything's working well here. So, normally, what happens? These community conversations I host every 3 months or so, but we do them in person. We were supposed to be at Belmead's Community League Hall today, and we were going to have a chat about a variety of city topics. As we know, things have changed dramatically, and we needed to change this into a virtual town hall. And I do use Facebook Live from time to time, and I'll continue to use that uh, going forward. But I do know, and I hear from some folks who don't have Facebook and who are looking for an opportunity to be engaged. And the other benefit of using YouTube from time to time is it's easier to share this content afterwards, sharing it through the website, making sure that people have access to it. Again, assuming they don't have Facebook. So, yeah, the idea here is we chat about a number of different city topics. Very much interested in your questions, your comments. So I'm following along. I've got the comments up on the side here. So please make sure you're entering in your feedback, your questions, and I've got a couple of topics that I want to cover today. And then we'll make sure that we set aside some time to go over what you have as well. So the other piece, of course, is I don't want to. I don't want this necessarily to be a COVID-19 specific conversation, in part because, I think the resources that I want to encourage all of you to be using are from the official City of Edmonton website, from the Alberta government website, Alberta Health Services, and the federal government. Uh, I've been trying to share everything that is posted through my social media as a way for us to for you to have access to that information. I think it's important that we sort of have one point of contact when it comes to the city of Edmonton, one point of contact when it comes to the province, and one point of contact for the federal government. So I'm sure there may be some folks who want to chat about that, and happy to take questions if you have some. But making sure that you are deferring and really relying on that. The resources that exist. And again, I think probably the most important one, at least the one that I know I'm watching every day, is Dr. Hinshaw's live updates. Typically at around 3:30, I'll watch those live, and it's important to make sure that we're listening to and following the advice of our health professionals. This is really, really important, and so I want to make sure that we're accessing that information appropriately. So with that said, I think it's hard not to at least talk about it in some way. And just while some of you followed what I've been talking about on social media, what's happened at City Council is that we've actually suspended all of our meetings. And generally speaking, there's going to be some scattered in between, but our normal course of business has been suspended till I believe it's now April 27th. And what that means is that I'm working remotely. Welcome to my den. This is where I've been working from pretty much every day for the last week and a half, as much as I can. Staying on top of emails as they're coming in. I've got my emails up behind me, and as we speak, some are still popping up. So trying to stay on top of those as quickly as possible, and then also making sure I can catch up on any calls. So, again, if you're calling into the office, please do. You'll get voicemail generally first, and that's fine. And then we have access to all of those voicemails and are working on whatever it is we can. And I just want to make sure I extend that offer to everyone. I recognize, I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to work from home, and we're trying to really follow that advice and not go out except for the occasional walk, and even when I do, making sure we have that social or physical distancing from everyone else. But not everyone can. There are folks who are working from home whose kids are now at home and trying to manage all of that, still working while also dealing with other issues. So um, make sure you know that we have capacity here to help at the office. So all of the Ward One office is still working, and we're all working remotely from our homes. So if you're struggling to find information, if you have questions about something, not sure where to start, even if you think it may be provincial or federal, don't hesitate to give me a call. Again, office number is 780-496-8122. I'll put that in the comments here below. And then also, again, you can just email me at andrew.knack@edmonton.ca. And I really want to make sure you're taking advantage of that, because again, we are doing everything we can to help support folks during this. And I realize you may have a lot going on in life, and to be able to just try and help direct you in the right space is something that I'd be happy to do in any way possible if you're interested. So, again, I will put that in here. I think this will all work. So uh, we'll see if this pops up the way it should. I haven't done a YouTube live stream in a while, so this should work. That there it is. And I'd encourage you to again reach out at any point in time using this information if something does come up that you have questions about. Again, even if it's something you think that's really simple, I really want you to reach out. We've got the opportunity to help you. I'd like to make sure that if that can in even a small way help alleviate any stress. Please use my contact information, which you should now see in the live chat, and happy to chat at any point in time. I think the only other thing, again, just to relate to, and I'll make sure I also put in the links to the City of Edmonton website for COVID information, and so that you have access to that. But again, I think just make sure that as you're thinking about this, as we're going through this time, uh, make sure you're reaching out to your neighbors. Make sure you're reaching out to friends, family members, even if you can't visit them in person, because we're trying to make sure we're respecting that physical distancing, that social distancing. uh, you know, that phone call is really important. There are still occasionally days you might have to go out to get some groceries. And have you thought about reaching out to your neighbor who may be in a different situation, have different health concerns, and is trying to avoid getting out? Have you thought about reaching out to them if you can? Again, checking out your community league Facebook pages, your community league websites. I know a lot of folks are now using the Nextdoor app. I'm on that as well, and seeing a lot of folks, which is really encouraging. Just how many folks are there saying, "Hey, listen, if you need anything, here's my number." And so it's exciting to see people come together on that. But just it's important to remind everyone to do that if you have that opportunity. And again, I'm going to put in here in the live chat just the link to the City of Edmonton's COVID-19 page, and then I'll also bring up the one for Alberta Health Services. Um, and I think, again, I can't stress enough that these are really the primary resources you should be referencing. There's a lot of information out there. I find it's really valuable to be getting it directly from here. So I'll share that again, so you'll have access to a number of these resources. Make sure you're using them. Make sure you're referencing them. And at any point in time, happy to answer specific questions, or if you've read something that's not entirely clear and you want to get some more detail on it, don't hesitate to reach out to me, again, using that contact information at the top. So um, that's probably the main things I want to chat about, just as sort of setting some context about what's going to happen. And the other piece is I want to do these videos a little more frequently. So again, while I do the in-person ones typically once every 3 months, in between attending community events, going door knocking, all of that, I have done typically every 2 months or so, some type of Facebook Live or live stream event. And then scattered between, I'll do a number of other videos or blog posts, which you can find on my website. And the reason I reference that is that one of the topics that we could spend a lot of time on here today, but I actually feel that it's important for folks to have a lot of that additional information, is the one related to residential speed limits. And so you likely heard a few weeks ago, council did make a decision to reduce the speed limit on the residential roads within our communities. Again, it's going to take some time to actually implement this, and again, I can't stress it enough. Does not at all apply to our main roads. So no matter where you live in the West End, if you're thinking about Winterburn Road, if you're thinking about Weber Greens Drive or 87th Avenue, 100th Avenue, Stony Plain Road, 95th Avenue, 149th Street, 142nd Street, 156th Street, sort of, if you think about those roads you're generally commuting on, those roads are staying the same. What's changing is going to be the speed limit on the roads that are within our communities. So, if you're thinking about where you live, once you've turned off that main arterial road into your community, then you're going to see a reduction in the speed limit from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour. And again, we could spend a lot of time going over that, but I actually did film about a 30-minute video on that a few weeks ago, right after the discussion occurred. And this would be one of the few that I'd really encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch that and to read through all of the blogs that I've written on that, I'd really encourage you to do that, because I think it provides just so much detail. Um, this is not a conversation that started even a year ago or 2 years ago. This is a conversation that started over a decade ago, actually, with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, looking to address traffic safety concerns of a number of communities across the city. And so between the video and the blog posts that I've written, you'll be able to go through all of that in detail and get all of that history if you haven't been following it. One final piece is that this is something I did campaign on in 2017 when I was campaigning in that election. I had drafted this fairly long platform. I think it was about 17 points that it came into. I think it was originally 16. And then actually, through the ongoing conversations that I was having at the doors with residents, the constant theme of traffic safety being raised and concerns around that caused me to add that additional points. So I think all the other points had been created over the course of multiple years through these conversations and ongoing pieces, but that one just really stood out so much so, and it's something I had obviously talked about well before even that election, but it was important enough that I felt I needed to make a commitment to it when I was running for re-election in 2017. And so many of you saw that when on my platform page, when you had the opportunity to discuss that. So again, just because that particular issue has a lot of history and a lot of information that sort of leads up to the final decision, I'd encourage you to jump onto my Facebook page and my website, and I'll put that in here again. It's just andrewknack.com for the website. I'll pull up the Facebook page soon enough, and then we can hear, and then you can take some time to read through that. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns, then you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat about that in more detail. Right now, as you can imagine, we're doing all my videos are exclusively, or all my meetings are via phone calls or video conference. So that's how I've been trying to handle that now. But once we get through this, also happy to go through and meet face to face as we do. And of course, at some point, we will be back into hosting in-person town halls, again, called our community conversations. So I've got a couple more topics, and I want to make sure that you can all enter in your feedback and your questions over in the live chat. I'm keeping an eye on this. I think so far it's just been some of my posts, but happy to get your feedback on this and your questions and things that you'd like to see us covering. So if you have the opportunity, make sure you add in your information here. And I'm just going to add in, again, I mentioned the Alberta government's site for COVID-19. Have that. And then really, I want to make sure, again, I've got a few topics. I want to chat a bit about snow removal. I also want to chat, I think that's probably the one of the other big ones that have come up quite a bit. I want to give a brief update on project management. And then I want to make sure, again, we spend some time chatting with you on what's on your mind. So let's do that. I'm going to just again to bring this up here, and feel free to add in your feedback, your comments. I'm interested in what's going on there. So I'm also just adding it in, letting people know on social media that they can join in. We've got some watching right now, so happy to take your questions, your feedback on whatever it is that you might want to be chatting about. Again, I don't want to restrict the conversation here. It's There's a lot going on, and want to make sure we have a chance to answer what's on your mind. So the other big topic I wanted to make sure I talked a bit about here. Well, maybe I'll start with the quick one, which is project management. Those who have been attending the in-person community conversations, you know that generally every time I do one, I provide a brief update on the status of our capital projects. And I do it because there is a perception, and I understand why the perception exists, but there is a perception that no city project is ever done on time or on budget. That is thankfully completely not true, but I understand why folks have that thought process. Generally, the when the media is doing a story on a capital project, they're not doing lots of stories on the projects that came in on schedule or on budget. They're doing stories on the projects that didn't. And so, if you only ever see those ones over and over and over again, uh, understandably, you begin to think, well, is the city doing anything or any of those projects right? And so that's why I like to do these updates, because again, thankfully, the answer is yeah. Actually, there's a lot right going on right now, and that's why I try to provide an update. So again, I we could spend a long, long time, and we won't, going over the history of all of the changes that have happened really since about 2015. But for a quick bit of history, in 2015, we had our city auditor go through and do a detailed audit on three projects that had generated a lot of attention because they weren't on time or on schedule, and thankfully those ones were on budget, but they generated a lot of attention, and that is a couple of the bridges, the Walter Dale Road Bridge and the Metro line. And so he went through, and his team, the Office of the City Auditor, their team went through and really did a deep dive to find out what was happening on those projects, what can we learn about what went wrong, and what changes can we make going forward. And again, we could spend all day just talking about all of the changes that have been made over the last couple of years. But um, the the quick note, and again, I'm going to share a link to the most recent blog post, which does provide a bit of that. Is there were staffing changes, there were changes related to reporting, and there these ones, and actually there was changes to how we actually manage projects. So the very quick version of it is that when council used to approve the budget and the schedule for a significant capital project, we would typically be doing it only after the preliminary design work. So if I could put it in the context, sort of put it into real life context. So, if you think about your home, and you were going to be doing, think about maybe you're living in an older home and you want to redo the basement. Well, you'd probably have someone come down, take a look, provide some feedback, let you know general idea of what they think it would cost, how long it would take. But chances are they're also going to say, if we're doing a full reno, we need to wait to get behind the walls to see just how much work actually needs to be done. Maybe there's a crack in the foundation that you weren't aware of. Now, in the case of the city, essentially what used to happen is we would approve the project schedule and the budget after that initial scoping exercise, that preliminary design work. So we'd have an idea of what we were going to build, but we didn't do that detailed review. And that created issues where some of our projects, some of our complex projects, were not meeting schedules. And so a number of changes were made that I just referenced earlier, and thankfully some started getting implemented right away, right after that audit, and we already started to see the impacts of that. For reference, and you can go back and read all of the previous blogs if you're interested on it. But we did see, by the end of our 4-year budget, and we have our capital budget cycle runs from 2015 to 2018. And what we saw is that around 80% of our significant capital projects, and those are our projects that are $20 million or more, uh, over 80% of them finished on or ahead of schedule, and over 95% finished on or under budget. So really encouraging numbers by the end of that 4-year cycle. But worth noting that not all of the changes we made had been implemented by the end of that point. One of the bigger changes that took effect for this budget cycle was that introduction of approving project scope and schedule only after the completion of our detailed design work. So we sort of run on a checkpoint process now. It's called our project development and delivery model, our PDDM, and we use that to help inform the project schedules and scope and budget. And so what we are doing now in our quarterly reporting, because there is quarterly reporting, that was one of the big changes made. But prior to us implementing that, there was no consistent reporting mechanism for city council to provide that oversight. Again, you don't want me as the micromanaging construction project, but I think our role as city council is to go and watch, make sure we're asking the right questions, make sure we have that check-in to be able to um, see how things are going, and then be able to answer questions when people have them. Because if you're not seeing progress, you want to know what's happened and why. So we started breaking out our capital project reporting so that we still have a number of our legacy projects from the last 4-year budget that are still finishing up, and then we have started reporting all of our new ones. So we're a year in. We're still fairly light on data. We only have about 15 projects to date, but what we're seeing is, again, 80% of our projects, so 12 of the 15 are on or ahead of schedule, and all 15 are on or under budget. And again, I think it's too early to get too excited one way or another. But that seems to be continuing at a minimum the trend we were seeing at the end of the last 4-year cycle. And the hope is that as we go further forward and really start to see a lot of these projects come on board, we will see that performance improve even more. And just for reference, I mean, it's hard because there aren't many cities that do the level of reporting that we do. We feel it was a really important change to make to provide that transparency for everyone, and so it's something that you can't compare to a lot of cities only because there isn't much data out there. Seattle seems to be really one of the only other cities we could track down much on, and worth noting that we are performing better than them. I think the last time we had seen theirs, they were trending at around 2/3 or 66% of their significant projects on or ahead of schedule, where we're at 80%. So I think it's a positive step. I think there are a lot of positive changes made. And again, I'm going to share for your reference the latest blog post, which also has a link. If you want to get all that history that I was chatting about, this blog post doesn't have it. But it does have a link to the one that I wrote in December, which does give a bit of a refresher as to everything that had changed over the last number of years. So if you get a chance, please make sure you're taking a look there, and we'll do that. So uh, that's project management blog sent up right there. And we got a question. So first of all, thanks for joining. Appreciate everyone watching right now. And again, I encourage you, if you have questions, if you have feedback you want to share on anything we're chatting about, make sure you're just adding it into the chat, and I'm happy to review it. And again, I still want to make sure we've chatted a bit about snow removal, but I have one question here. Joshua, good to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. You asked around buildings along Stony Plain Road near 149th. Many businesses have moved out, and you're asking if it's clearing the way for renovation due to the LRT coming in, coincidence, or something else. So um, I can't speak to every location, but I think there's some. A little further west of 149th along Stony Plain Road, just west of the Shoppers Drug Mart, that the city owns most of those properties up to the United Way building, not including the United Way building. So the city owns that, and those buildings are going to be coming down as part of LRT construction. There are some buildings further west. If you know where the salvage furniture store is, we own actually that lot and the empty lot beside it. And the city also owns some lots closer, right at 156th Street on that would be the southeast corner. So there's a number of buildings that we own, but I'm thinking the ones near 149th that you're referring to, those are the ones that the city owns, and those buildings will come down as part of the construction. Um, and then afterwards, they will be able to be put back on once all that work is done. Everything else on 149th, I know, I think uh, the ones right along 149th on the Gilded Rabbit side and Rendezvous Pub side, I think they're all still there. So I don't believe I saw anything, and I was just here recently. And the Jasper Gate side is all privately owned still, and I know some of it's moving. And part of that, so if you haven't heard, they're the owners of the Jasper Gate Shopping Center, and they own most of that property, but there's actually a portion of the land owned by Safeway. But the entire site came to council about a month and a half ago for a rezoning application where they want to transition that site into a full mixed use development. So to still have commercial properties, but actually also have residential buildings above those commercial properties. So that was approved unanimously by council, and so you'll likely over time see changes there, but the RioCan, or at least on their portion of their land, you're going to start seeing things move around. They want to start construction when we start construction on the Valley Line West LRT, which some of the work's already underway. You've seen utility work happening last year, and there's more this year, and there's more even the year after, and the main construction's coming up afterwards. So. Yeah, so lots going on there, and stay tuned. You'll see a lot of change at the same time. I think you're going to see some opportunities and see a lot of the commercial property be retained or maybe just moved into a different location. And then I think you're going to see more and more of that along all of Stony Plain Road. Even in fact, just one other one that didn't really get much attention. Jasper Gates got a lot, but actually a month later, so just about 3 weeks ago, council approved. A rezoning application of the Shoppers Drug Mart No Frills site, and what they wanted to do is again a mixed use development. And chatting with the property owners, I mean, I don't think they're in a rush to do it, and at the same time, they want to make sure that what they're looking to do essentially is to be able to move things. Have your commercial properties on the bottom, and again have residential buildings up on top, and which I think is again exciting to help support a lot of the businesses, bring more people living on Stony Plain Road. And as somebody that often goes to that No Frills, very excited to see anything that can help her get even more people, make sure that supporting that, and I think you're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. For anyone who's interested, by the way, today was the launch of The Span, which is a community newspaper. You might remember there used to be a community newspaper for the sort of Jasper Place area a number of years ago, and this is sort of a reintroduction of it. So it is out, and I've started sharing it on social media. If you get a chance to read it, please do. It doesn't even matter if you don't live in the neighborhoods, whether you're in Kenora, West Jasper Place, Britannia, Youngstown, Glenwood, or anywhere else in the ward. I would encourage you to read it just to stay on top of some of the really great things that are happening in the area. So next one was let's see. Yeah. Oh, Derek. Yeah, you're right. The poor flamingo. That was. I live very close to that one. That was a sad one to see, and I know what. While the city works with every property owner to try to provide accommodation, some businesses just choose to not sort of open in different areas, or for any number of reasons. And I don't want to speculate as to any of the reasons for them. But yeah, it was a great space. Sad to see that one go. We'll see more great small businesses like that, small restaurants like that open up, and because I think it was a wonderful one. Paul, you had a question in relation to alternatives to in-person attendance of council meetings. You asked, with COVID-19, more people are working from home and are using technology and alternative methods of communication. Has the attitude of council changed with regards to allowing people to video chat in? Thanks for the question. I smile because, as some of you know, and in fact, it was something I campaigned on in 2017 and something I campaigned on in 2013 for that matter. I've really been pushing to see if we can introduce video communication tools into our council and our committee meetings. And the thinking behind that is, I recognize that most people, if you're working a standard Monday to Friday 9 to 5 job, as an example, and there's an important issue that we're talking about at City Council, sometimes people have to take a whole day off work just to come and speak to an issue that they're passionate about. And that's fine for some folks, but for a lot of others, particularly those who are maybe younger, starting out in their careers, or who are just don't have that type of flexibility in their work. um, I've heard requests, and I think it would be really important to allow people to do something like what we're doing right now. So if we're speaking to an issue, if there's an issue on the agenda that's important, uh, every member of the public has the opportunity to register to speak, and they are given 5 minutes to share their perspective to City Council. And the rules are fairly strict in that you can't call in unless you are outside of the City of Edmonton. And there are some exceptions made for persons with disabilities, but beyond that, everyone else is not permitted to use any type of video conferencing, whether it's Skype or FaceTime or Google Hangout or whatever it may be, to chat. And in fact, generally speaking, when it comes to council meetings, we suspended the rules that require us to be in person at City Hall to count towards quorum. And we had to, in part because we want to encourage that social distancing, that physical distancing. I think we're transitioning to the word physical distancing. That's why I'm using both right now. I've been used to saying social distancing the last week and a half, but I think that's what's jumping on it now. Um, and so we suspended those rules, and whether people's opinions are going to change on this, I hope so. Right? I think it is really important to provide new ways for folks to engage. And I recognize there's concern about if that gets abused. Do you have the same people registering for every single meeting to chat about an issue? But frankly, I sort of wouldn't be opposed to that. I think if that encourages more people to get engaged, yeah, it means some of our meetings are going to be a bit longer. But you know what? I think the more we can get people engaged in council meetings, the better. I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna revisit that. If I'm being honest, I maybe this would cause me to think about revisiting it this term. My view was that, I brought it up this term. It was not successful. The will of council was to not proceed and sort of stick to normal. But because we are in sort of a new world now, and maybe there is an openness, and I think that that's a conversation for the future. One thing I think we could do is actually tap into the guiding coalition on public engagement, which exists in the city, and it's a citizen panel, well, citizen and actually administrative panel, which helps provide guidance on public engagement throughout the city. And I sit as one of the council reps on that committee. And I think it'd be nice to have that group to be able to review all of how we engage and how we let people engage, and see if maybe we can come up with some interesting recommendations. I've certainly found, like, even in a week and a half since I'm working at home almost exclusively, um, that I actually find this using video conference tools to be really valuable. And a lot of the meetings that I maybe in the past would have scheduled for 30 or 60 minutes, we've scheduled for that and then we finish in 15. And I don't know if that's because there's just a different way of thinking about it now, but I actually feel like I should be using that tool a bit more often. So I'm thinking about this going forward. There'll be plenty of time for reflection once we're through this, but I do believe that even when the time comes and we're back to a more standard state of normal, if you will, um, I'm thinking, like, maybe once a week or once every couple weeks, I just do a virtual office hours, and, open up a Google Hangout, and people can pop in and out at any point in time. And I can do that while I'm working on emails or anything else. So we'll keep that. And I appreciate your point, Paul. You're talking about the community leagues are adjusting now. Some AGMs are looking to go that route, and Derek, I think you talked about that as well. And I am seeing that. I am seeing some leagues. I know Secord is going to be doing their AGM as sort of a teleconference, or I don't know if they're doing video conference, but for sure a teleconference. So I think we need to be willing to look at new ways. Janice, you had two questions. I'll get to your first one here, which was, is the Jasper Place Hotel on a city lot or is it private? So it is not a city-owned lot. It is still privately owned. Yeah, and you wanted to ask the question. I think many have asked, is that property going to be demolished? Still tough to say. Last time, I for the first time in my 6.5 years on council, was able to meet with the owners of that property, and I met with them 3-4 months ago, around there, and they were chatting about a couple of different things, but I also expressed to them that I think to a lot of the community members who live around that, it is seen fairly or unfairly as one of the, um, it doesn't add a lot to the community. I think there's a perception of that it's not something that's really contributing a lot, and I shared that with the owners, and I suggested to them that they need to start reaching out to each of the communities. I asked them the last time they reached out to the communities, and they couldn't remember. It sounded like it had been, maybe a decade. And I think it's important that they recognize that if they're going to continue operating and having that space, that they need to be a good neighbor. And I also encourage them to reach out to the Stony Plain Road Business Improvement Areas, the new executive director, Todd Janes. And I also shared their contact information with Todd directly so that he could reach out to them. And we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, it's a privately owned building. There's no requirement to demolish that. You had also had a question. Your next one was about transit, and you asked, that fare. You say that I know that fares are currently suspended. Was there any thought to hold payments for those on the ETS at Work program? We are still paying passes for when no one else is. So, and I think you just sent me a Facebook message on that as well. So, thank you. I saw that, and I'm going to be sharing that with our COVID-19 task force, because I think that was a really good flag. You know, and I don't know if it was just something they hadn't got to yet, in I imagine the host of things that they're trying to work on. So I'll follow up, and I will report back as soon as I know more, or potentially it would be something that's shared through the city network as well. So thank you for that question. A good reminder, and I know it was on my list. I saw it on my Facebook list there before. Um, Next question was talking about any updates on the 137th Ave Starling Road extension. Yeah, anyone who knows, so Ward 1 goes all the way out to the very northwest corner of the city, right up against the boundary of St. Albert. And there's three communities right now, just west of Ray Gibbon Drive and north of the Yellowhead. And there's Starling, Trumpeter, and Hawks Ridge. And there is a long story around who owns what in that space. But the short version is there's a conflict. There's a intersection that's being used at 137th Ave and Ray Gibbon Drive. It's very hard for folks to access their community, especially if they're coming off the Henday. And the problem is it's not city owned, yet there's sort of a bunch of different parties involved, the province being one, who is the sort of the owners of that intersection, if you will. And then the city of St. Albert, of course, as immediately as you cross over. And so there had been some conversations. The province and the city of St. Albert had come to an agreement to twin Ray Gibbon Drive, which, great news. That would begin to help to solve some problems. Other than, when they were originally drafting the agreement was to require the closure of that intersection. Um, and at which point I sort of jumped in from the city side, saying, I know we're not actually an owner of land that is affected by this particular agreement, but if you close that access without something in its place, folks that live in Starling and Trumpeter, in particular Hawks Ridge residents who would generally use 215th Street, it would be near impossible to access space. So there was a lot of work happening behind the scenes. I didn't originally raise it with council because I wanted to let our city administration work with provincial administration and St. Albert City administration to develop whatever that plan looks like. And long story short, the province agreed that when part of their funding agreement with the city of St. Albert is they can't close that access point until we have something in its place. But there's still a broader question around what the future road access looks like. And so I actually recently, it was probably about a month and a half ago, did a formal inquiry at council just to get this on an agenda because it's more than a transportation project through the province and the city of St. Albert. There's a land use conversation around future land that it will be needed for the road. As an example, I envision, in fact, the likely future access may have to be using where Leclerc Way currently connects to Ray Gibbon Drive and then connecting it in there. But I don't know the final answer yet, and so within the city of Edmonton proper, as an organization, we've had our infrastructure services team involved, but there's also an intergovernmental conversation around land ownership because if we're going to use that, well, that's actually not city-owned land. So the inquiry was just meant to sort of bring all the parties together, get it onto a formal agenda, because I do think this is something all of council needs to be aware of. There's a lot to this part, to this particular conversation. So stay tuned to your community Facebook page. Yeah, the last update I think I did was about a month and a half ago. And I've been chatting with the Big Lake Community League around making sure they're come out when that next meeting occurs. With council meetings being suspended, that may, I don't know what the final timeline will be, but as I know more, I will share that. So, and yeah, I think the other, and just seeing your other comment, I'm guessing what you're referencing is that part of why this matters is that it's not just a traffic safety issue. There's wildlife issues and all of that connected together, and it sort of needs to be brought together. And that's the idea behind the inquiry as that was made. So, Paul, you had another question around, do you happen to know what is happening with the rundown and closed hotel on Stony Plain Road near, oh, the Continental? That you're talking about the one further west, closer to Mayfield, Commons, I think, if I recall. And short answer, no. I've seen that, and I don't actually know the status of that particular one. But it does actually raise one good thing that I want to briefly touch on. I recently did a motion. It was back in January. We've been um, through the city charter and the changes to the Municipal Government Act. We've been able to adjust how we look at property taxes. And in specific for me, one of the big concerns I have always had is around those derelict or underutilized properties, primarily the derelict ones that really are run down and not adding value to the community. And some jurisdictions in other provinces, some municipalities in other provinces actually have a property tax penalty that they put in on derelict or rundown properties to force one of two things, either for the property owner to fix it up or for them to sell it to somebody who will. We haven't really had there's a debate that we've somewhat had the ability, but not really in years past, but now we really do have that ability. So the motion I made in January asked them to come back and say, what steps do we need to take to do something similar here? And so that would apply to any property that is derelict, that is run down, and we may even include underutilized properties. So you think about, we have a lot of surface parking lots in areas that really probably don't need surface parking lots. So we'll even look at that, and there will be a report again at some point in time in the coming months here on what we might be doing for that. So I think we've covered a bunch of those questions. I wanted to briefly chat about snow removal. And as I'm doing that, please continue to add your questions, your feedback on anything that you have. So why I wanted to chat about snow removal, and forgive me, I'm just going to grab a little drink here. And that's good video. Thank you. But I just wanted to make sure I covered some of the latest. So I've written a lot of blog posts, and again, we won't go through all of those. But one of the more recent ones I wrote in February related to primarily the conditions of our local roads in the community and how snow clearing was working. And yeah, I think is it snowing again? I didn't look outside. It snowed earlier today, so I don't wanna look outside right now if it's snowing again. Um, but the there were a couple things that I think, this year more so than most felt like it was not quite the same level of service, particularly within communities. I got a fairly standard amount of calls or emails around how we do on the main roads. Usually I'll get a couple of calls and emails after a particularly icy condition, after a freezing rain cycle, and people concerned about, the response onto the main roads. But generally speaking, it was fairly consistent. I didn't notice anything abnormal there, but really noticed it. Really got a lot of feedback from folks who were frustrated about residential blading, and both the lead up to it, because it took I think a little longer than we probably should have taken to start it in the first place, and then when we did it, it felt a little inconsistent. So I wrote a blog post with some of the ideas that I think we need to change when we have our update policy discussion in June. But I'll share a few thoughts, because one of the biggest challenges I have right now, and something I've talked about it at a lot of these, and never formally did a motion, because I wanted to let our crews do their work. But essentially, um, what I think is one of the biggest barriers is, in fact, when we do blading, the lack of requirement to actually have the cars off the street. So we do it on snow routes, on the bus routes, we require it. There's a parking ban in effect. People are made aware of it, but we don't do it for residential blading. And even when the signs were going up, people would not often follow that. And what that means is that our crews are really challenged to do as good of a job as we would like, because if you're using that larger equipment and you're constantly weaving in and out between vehicles, it's no surprise that the quality of work is not the level it needs to be. And that's actually nothing to do with the crews themselves, but everything to do with the policy that council has set, which in turn allows them to do their job. So, I've heard it from folks I've had the opportunity to go for a ride along, and I think when I hear that feedback over and over again, and you look at what's happening in other cities in Canada, particularly cities in Eastern Canada, that require the cars to be off the road, it allows crews to do a better job, and it allows them to do that job more quickly than they would under a standard blading. And this is an example, because Paul, the point you just added around blading to the pavement and making sure that all the drains are clear. So it's a lot easier to do that if we have clear streets when our crews are going in. Now there are challenges that we run into. So something you'll see in that blog post as well is, we talk about boulevards, and some neighborhoods have them, and it's a great space to put snow up onto. And you see some of the best cities that do snow removal the best have boulevards essentially on every single street. Even St. Albert, if you go there, pretty much every single street has a boulevard, and it's no surprise that they can do as good of a job they do. I mean, yes, they pay even more in taxes, but but it's also the design of the neighborhood that has allowed them to be more effective at the job that they're doing. And so we need to do some similar things. We need to have policy that allows crews to do a better job. When we're reconstructing neighborhoods, we need to make sure that uh, that we're building in boulevards. When we're doing new neighborhoods, generally going forward, we need to likely. I don't know if it's a full requirement, or if it's a substantial requirement that the vast majority of the roads have to have it. I've been chatting with some of our city staff around that, around if there's something that we should actually consider doing a full motion and requiring it. And so we'll see if that comes forward. But I think when you reflect back on the areas where we do some of the best work, it's areas where we've designed it to have a place to push up snow, because for everyone's reference, and it's talked about in the time, but actually removing the snow is incredibly expensive. It used to be years ago, more so than a little over a decade ago, that cities used to be able to take the snow and just pile it up at a community green space. And, in fact, it was a little fun because it was like a little hill that people could use and kids would use and families would use. But we can't do that anymore. That's not allowed. You have to, if you're going to remove snow, unless you're pushing up just the limited amount of snow onto the boulevard, if you're actually talking about removing snow, you have to remove it to a dedicated snow storage site. So, removing snow, and if we're blading down to pavement, that really triggers the requirement to essentially be removing snow more regularly. And so, if we have boulevards, that helps reduce that impact and lets people focus the way that it is. So, there's a number of changes we need to make on the policy side that will allow crews to be more effective in the residential communities. And we do need to have that trade-off conversation that you've talked about, Paul, in some of your comments. So, um, if we want to get down to pavement, we need policy to allow for that. But I think I'll be honest, it likely also means that there would need to be some budget changes too. Yes, the last couple of years we've managed to not use up our entire snow removal budget, but I think the last thing you want to do is tap into your surplus and assume that you're not going to hit what you've sort of trended at in years past. So we have to find that balance. But and I do think there's a case to be made. So a good example, and something else I've touched on in the blog, is we actually don't have any dedicated equipment to blade a cul-de-sac in the city of Edmonton. Well, we actually have over 3,400 of them. And what we do is we contract out that service. And I'm not opposed to supplementing services through contracting out, but the fact that we have none of our own equipment to do that is really, really baffling to me. And yes, it goes back to the 90s when, in order to have 4 years in a row, 0% increases, tax increases, the city sold off essentially almost all their equipment. And over time, we've had to buy back. And I think this is one of those things that we need to look at the equipment, the fleet that we have, and say, we bought a lot of equipment that was designed to be multi-purpose. And again, I think for a lot of reasons, when you say it out loud, you say, "Oh yeah, of course. Well, why wouldn't you want to buy equipment that can be used at all times of year?" But when you are a winter city like us that gets the level of snow that we do, with now the freeze thaw cycles that we get, maybe it is important to step back and say, we actually might need to have specialized equipment. And sure, if there's a way to tap into it and use it in another capacity outside of the winter season, great. But we need to give crews the equipment and the tools to effectively do their job. So I think there's some good arguments to make to actually start bringing back in some of that. Derek, you asked, how do I get a ride along? I don't know if we can just do it for anyone. I think that's one of the perks of the job here, which is I had the opportunity to set something up. So I'll try. I'll see if there's any way. I'm not sure if that actually does happen. Let's see. And oh yeah, and there's a couple Derek's on here. So Derek, you had mentioned that this year plowing didn't seem to follow the posted schedule, and yeah, short answer, yes. And again, I think this goes back to some of what I'd like to see, along with all the other changes we just talked about, is give every community a set day of the week, probably, and I would argue, just for the sake of simplicity, tie it to the garbage collection schedule. So if your community's garbage pickup day is a Monday, that is the day that residential blading would occur when we've announced it, right? We're not going to do it, every week. I do think we need to do it more often than once a year, as I think you also noted in there, Paul. So if we're doing this 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, um, when we make that announcement that residential blading is in effect, people can remember, oh, my day of the week is Monday and it's Tuesday. Okay, well that means I'm not going to get my work done until my community done for 6 days, but at least And if through the other changes we make it simpler and easier for the crews to do their job, my hope that we would do that. Um, that we could do it all in 1 week instead of a 2 week process. Because right now we spend, I think, about 2 weeks on average for neighborhood blading cycle. So, and yeah, that may not be perfect, but I'll also add one of the things that I flagged in the blog is that there are cities. Toronto's a great example. If you go to Toronto's website, they have a snowplow website that shows you in live where all of their pieces of equipment are, when the last time that a particular road was done, and so you can see it in real time. We need that as well. I think that's a very we need that type of technology. I'll add one further, which is that I think we need the ability to let people opt in for text message notification. Again, like put it into email, put it on signs, put it in everywhere. I realize not everyone has a cell phone, but a large percentage do, and I'd really like us, especially if you're tying into real-time technology, to be able to say, give people a 24-hour notice or a 12-hour notice that, hey, blading's going to be happening. It's your day of the week. Get your car off the street. If you don't, we're towing it. So clean out your garage, get some extra space on your driveway pad, and do that. So lots to talk about in snow removal. More to come in June. And again, if you haven't had a chance to read that blog, please do. And happy to get more feedback in advance of that. So let's see here. Just going to pull up. I think they've got a couple other questions. Perfect. Oh yeah. Okay. I think we've probably done enough on snow removal for that. Uh, you had asked last question, or here this question is around any discussion over cleanliness of alleyways beyond calling 311 for garbage piles, etc. Some cities really utilize alleys and communities and are beautiful. You mentioned you're in Kenora, and I would probably apply that to almost every alley in that I'm aware of that I walk down. And you say in Kenora they're shameful. I think generally they're just not great, and not well maintained. So you may remember that, gosh, it's well not 4 or 5, almost 6 years ago now. When I was first running in 2013, one of the things I was hoping to accomplish was to bring treat our alleys like we treat our front streets, because in a lot of mature neighborhoods they are as used, if not more so, and they really do serve as a more of a main, a primary street in a community. And in fact, you think about, we're starting to see more garden suites in the back, and that back alley now is becoming somebody's front street. So how do we properly maintain these? So the first thing was getting them to be considered like we consider so having a similar program like we had with neighborhood renewal for alleys. Long story short, again, you can read all the blogs I've written on it over the time, but we finally approved it a couple of years ago. The alley renewal program is now in place, meaning alleys will be fully reconstructed, and not just fully reconstructed using the current base, because one of the issues in our alleys is the base of the actual road is not designed for the heavier vehicles. So design it more like a front street in somebody's home. Why I share that, because you might ask, how does that impact cleanliness? Well, if we're starting to treat these roads ourselves as the city of Edmonton like a local street in front of your home, I think that's going to help both inspire people to treat their alleys a little more, a little better, and to be more aware of the cleanliness. Will it solve everything? No, and it's going to take us, like with neighborhood renewal, it's going to take us a couple decades to get through everything. So in the short term, um, how do we address cleanliness? I don't know if I have a perfect answer. I think you mentioned 311, and it's a good tool. And if you have the app and you're walking out and about and you can just snap a picture, that's probably the easiest and the quickest way of doing it. Um, if there's a particular property where you're always noticing it and you're snapping that picture, that making sure you're tying the address for our bylaw officers to flag. If it's an apartment, I know you think about Kenora, they have a good number of apartment buildings. So if there's an apartment building, is it worth reaching out to a property manager to flag it for them, to make them think about cleanliness? So I don't have a good answer. I don't have a perfect answer of how we address that. I think, it's just something we all need to be working on. And I think it's an important tool. And we did get another question around, you asked why are alleys even a thing. And I think number one is just designed that way for a lot of times. We in a lot of our mature neighborhoods, that was part of the original design and love of it. People like, in mature neighborhoods, I know one of the things that a lot of people really like is not having that garage right in the front of the home. It creates a bit more of a walkable street because you don't have to always worry about cars pulling in and out of that space because they're parking in the back. Um, And for a lot of cases, there's utility infrastructure there now, and so, getting rid of them is not really a simple thing at this stage. So because of that, that's part of why I wanted to make sure we were treating them appropriately, because that is where a lot of that infrastructure is right now. So we're coming up on about an hour, just about an hour at this stage. I wanted to see, and I think we've covered a lot so far. I thought I would get ready to wrap up and just mention again, because I want to do this likely once a week at least, over the next probably 4 or 5 weeks. So while I'm working remotely, this is a really good opportunity for me to chat. And I'm not going to exclusively use YouTube. Paul had mentioned, and I was thinking about it as well, setting up like a Google Hangout, where people can sort of pop in and out. And instead of me just talking for an hour straight, and reading your comments, people could actually jump in and share their comments and speak to it, which A, gives me a chance to have a more than one sip of water in an hour, but B, just to have a bit more of a back and forth discussion on different things, and for everyone to hear that feedback as well. It's nice for people to get a variety of perspectives. So I'm going to look at doing Google Hangout. I'll be doing Facebook Live again. So many of you already follow me on social media, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I usually try to post dates and times for this, so stay tuned. I'll probably do one again right around this time next week. I might do it a little later. Originally, I was doing this a bit earlier. Normally, when I've done community conversations, I usually started them at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. The reason I had started this one at 5:30 was because I was spring break, and I thought, oh, great, maybe it's an opportunity to get a different crowd that doesn't normally get to come out to the in-person town halls or community conversations. That, of course, changed, and so that's why we're doing this. So stay tuned. Just keep your eye out on that, and please, follow. And if you're on following right now on YouTube, I know a number of you are watching it now, or if you're watching it later, I feel like everyone on their YouTube page just tells you to like and subscribe. At a minimum, if you can subscribe. If you like it, then please even better. But subscribe only because I think that way you can stay informed as to when I'm doing more videos on there. I want to put more up on YouTube because, again, I find it as an easier source for people to use across the internet. So it doesn't force people to have Facebook or anything else. This is something I can send to pretty much anyone. So if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to this page here. And because I do plan on using it more and more, any of the videos that I'm filming are typically going up on the YouTube page as well as some of the other social media I use. And I think that's about it. So I will wrap up now and say thank you again for joining me today, and look forward for the conversation we'll have in the coming weeks here. And again, as I noted at the beginning of the live chat, I realize a lot of folks are dealing with a lot right now. And note that we've got folks here working in the Ward 1. We're all working in our remote offices, serving folks in Ward 1. So email me, call me. Uh, Again, you might think it's a simple question. If you don't know where to start to find a piece of information when you're dealing with this, again, we might not be able to answer every question, but we can at least help get you in the right direction. If you know people who are struggling, who need some support at this time, don't hesitate to have them reach out to us. We want to connect people as best we can, answer questions. So please take advantage of that phone number there, that email there. Reach out as often as you like, because we have the ability that everyone in this office, in the Ward 1 office, is working. We're not laying anyone off, and I want to make sure we all got things to do, and this has been a great opportunity for us to catch up and catch up on a lot of things that have been sitting in the backlog. But that's only going to go on for so long, and with no meetings for at least another 4 weeks or so. No formal council meetings. We have emergency meetings, emergency advisory committee meetings, and city council meetings as needed, virtually. But really want people to access the resources that we have, and can find you that information. So thanks everyone for watching. Good to chat with you, and we'll be in touch. Bye for now, everyone.